Lila had been traveling across the galaxy for days, her mind lost in the vastness of space when the transmission came in. The planet she was heading to, Valley Ridge, was in the middle of a storm unlike any she had seen before. As a seasoned nomad and adventurer, she had dealt with plenty of bad weather, but this one felt different. She landed her small ship on the outskirts of a ranch that looked older than most places she had visited. The air was thick, and the skies above the ranch were a swirling mix of dark clouds and distant flashes of lightning. Something didn't feel right. She couldn't shake the feeling that whatever storm was brewing here wasn't just a natural phenomenon. Lila stepped out of her ship and walked toward the farmhouse in the distance. Her boots made soft thuds on the dirt path, and the wind whispered through the tall grass around her. As she approached the ranch, she saw a tall, broad figure standing in front of the house. He was looking at her, his face hidden under a wide-brimmed hat, his posture rigid like a man who had seen far too much. It didn't take long for the man to speak. His voice was low, commanding, "Get inside now before it's too late." Lila froze for a moment, staring at him. The tone of his voice was serious, more serious than she expected from someone living on a remote ranch. There was a storm coming, that was clear, but the urgency in his eyes told her there was more to the story. "Who are you?" Lila asked, her hand instinctively resting on the weapon strapped to her side. She didn't want trouble, but she'd been in enough dangerous situations to know how quickly things could go wrong. "The name's Mason," he said, his eyes scanning the horizon as if he expected trouble at any moment. "This storm, it's not what you think. It's worse." Lila took a step closer, but Mason didn't move. His eyes narrowed as he looked at her. "Trust me, you don't want to be out here when it hits. Get inside." For a moment, Lila hesitated. The storm in the distance seemed to be growing, the winds picking up and the sky darkening. But something about Mason's words and the urgency in his tone made her take a deep breath and nod. She walked toward the farmhouse, and Mason followed her closely, as if he didn't want her to stray too far. He led her through the heavy wooden door and into the dimly lit interior. The air inside was warmer than the cold outside, and the smell of aged wood and something faintly metallic filled her nose. Mason didn't wait for her to say anything. He motioned toward a narrow staircase leading to the basement. "Go down there. Stay there, and whatever you hear, don't come out." Lila felt a chill run down her spine. This wasn't the warm welcome she had hoped for. She stared at Mason, trying to gauge his intentions, but his face was unreadable. "Why?" she asked, though she already had a sinking feeling in her gut. "Just go. It's the only way you'll survive," Mason said, his voice barely above a whisper. He turned away from her and started to close the door behind him. "What's going on, Mason?" Lila pressed, her curiosity getting the better of her. He paused for a moment but didn't answer. Instead, he grabbed a thick metal bar and started locking the door from the inside. "Get to the basement now," he repeated. Lila stared at him, torn between trusting him and pushing back. But as the first crack of thunder echoed from outside, she made up her mind. She couldn't ignore the strange look in his eyes. Whatever was coming, it was something she wasn't prepared to face alone. Lila descended into the cellar, the smell of dust and damp stone filling the air. The door shut behind her with a heavy thud, leaving her in near darkness. She flicked on a small flashlight from her belt and glanced around. The room was sparse, with a few old crates and barrels stacked against the walls. It looked like it hadn't been used in years, but Mason had obviously prepared it for emergencies. She crouched down near the far corner, her mind racing. Outside, the wind began to howl louder, and she could hear the distant crackle of lightning. The storm was coming closer. But it was more than just the storm that worried her. What did Mason know that he wasn't telling her? Lila's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of something tapping against the metal door above. It was faint at first, almost like the rain was hitting the roof. But then it grew louder. The sound of nails scratching against metal, then the heavy thud of something slamming into the door. Lila's breath caught in her throat. Her hand instinctively went to the blaster at her side. What in the world was that? Then a long, eerie scream filled the air, chilling her to the bone. It was unlike anything she had heard before, a high-pitched wail that sent a shiver through her spine. She stumbled backward, her heart racing. What was that sound? The creatures from the storm? Before she could gather her thoughts, there was a loud bang. Something massive had just hit the farmhouse. Lila stood frozen, trying to steady her breathing. She knew Mason was above her, but he hadn't said anything else. She didn't know if he was safe or if he had even survived the hit. Panic started to rise in her chest, but she forced herself to stay calm. She had no choice but to wait. Minutes turned to hours, and the storm continued its furious assault. Every now and then she heard noises from above, but nothing that gave her any comfort. There was no telling what Mason was doing or what was happening outside. Then, as if it couldn't get worse, the lights in the basement flickered. Something was happening, something beyond the storm, something far darker. Lila's instincts screamed at her to leave, to find Mason, but her mind told her to wait. She wasn't sure if she could trust him yet, but one thing was clear. There was something powerful and dangerous out there, and it was getting closer. Lila's eyes darted around the dimly lit basement. The storm above continued its rage, the wind howling as if it were alive, pushing against the house like some invisible force. The metallic clangs of something heavy hitting the walls echoed in the distance. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was waiting for something terrible to happen. The air inside the basement felt thick, almost suffocating. It was hard to focus, her mind spinning in 1,000 directions. What was going on out there? What was Mason hiding? She had seen enough of the universe to know that people didn't act this way unless they were hiding something, and Mason's actions were speaking louder than his words. She tried to shake off the feeling of unease that gnawed at her stomach and moved toward the corner where a small table was cluttered with maps and tools. One map caught her eye. It was a map of the ranch, and underneath the surface, faint lines marked paths that led deep into the ground, almost like tunnels. What were these? Her eyes narrowed as she traced the markings with her finger. Whatever was happening, it seemed to have something to do with the land itself. Suddenly, the silence was shattered by a loud crash from above. Lila's heart leapt in her chest, and she rushed to the door, pressing her ear to the cold metal. She heard footsteps, slow and heavy, moving across the floor above her. Then a muffled voice. It was Mason. "Stay down there. Don't come out until I say so." His voice was firm, but there was an edge of something else in it, something she couldn't quite place. Lila swallowed hard. She wanted to yell at him, demand answers, but she couldn't afford to make noise. Whatever was happening, it wasn't just about the storm anymore. Something else was at play here. Something bigger and far more dangerous than she had imagined. She sank back against the wall, her mind racing. She couldn't just wait in the dark forever. Mason knew something, and she needed to know it too. She had faced her share of dangers across the galaxy, but this felt different. There was something ancient here, something buried deep within the earth, and it was waking up. Minutes turned into an hour, and then another. The storm didn't seem to be letting up. If anything, it was getting worse. The walls of the farmhouse trembled with every rumble of thunder, and each new crash outside sent a fresh wave of panic through her. Then, the basement door creaked open, and Lila's heart nearly stopped. She spun around, but it was only Mason. His face was drawn, tired, and his clothes were covered in dirt and grime. There was something in his eyes, fear perhaps, or something worse. But when he saw her, he didn't waste any time. "Get up," he ordered. His voice was low and urgent. "We need to go." Lila stood slowly, her confusion only growing. "Go where?" she asked, her heart pounding in her chest. "What's happening? Why did you lock me in here?" Mason's face tightened. "You wouldn't understand. But you're not safe here. There's no time to explain. Just trust me." He turned without waiting for her reply and started toward the staircase leading to the upper floor. Lila hesitated, her hand hovering near her sidearm. But she couldn't shake the feeling that if she didn't follow him, things could get much worse. She had no choice but to trust him. For now. She followed Mason up the stairs, her mind racing with questions. What was going on? What had he been hiding? And why was the storm growing so violent? As they reached the top of the stairs, Mason led her into a narrow hallway, his eyes flicking nervously from side to side. "We're not safe here," Mason muttered again, more to himself than to her. "They're coming." Lila felt her stomach tighten. "Who's coming?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he opened a door to a small room and motioned for her to step inside. The room was cold, its walls lined with strange symbols she couldn't recognize. But the symbols weren't what caught her attention. It was the large, circular object in the center of the room. It looked like an ancient machine, its metal surface covered in dust and strange markings. "This is why you need to stay in here," Mason said, his voice almost hollow. "This thing, it's the only way to stop them." Lila walked toward the machine, her curiosity piqued. She had seen ancient technology before, but this was different. It was old, older than any tech she had encountered. It seemed alive, its metal surface humming with a low, vibrating energy. "What is this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Mason closed the door behind them and leaned against the frame. He looked at the machine for a moment as if he were gathering the strength to speak. Finally, he answered. "This machine is why this planet is so dangerous," he said, his voice tight with regret. "It's called a conduit, and it was built long ago to control the storms and the creatures that live beneath the earth." Lila's brow furrowed in confusion. "Creatures?" "Yes," Mason said grimly. "Creatures that were sealed away, buried deep beneath the planet's surface. The storms, the strange energy, it's all connected. These creatures were once the rulers of this planet, and they have been waiting for the right moment to rise again." Lila stared at him in disbelief. "You're telling me that the storm outside, when the one that's destroying everything, is because of these creatures?" Mason nodded. "Yes, and the storm is just the beginning. Once the storm reaches its peak, they'll rise from the earth. And when they do, they'll destroy everything in their path. The only way to stop them is to activate the conduit and shut it down before it's too late." Lila's mind spun. She had been to dangerous planets before, but this was something entirely different. She glanced at the machine again, trying to make sense of what Mason had just said. "Why didn't you tell me this earlier?" she demanded. "Why keep me locked up down there?" Mason ran a hand through his hair, looking exhausted. "I had to make sure you weren't connected to the energy. You can't touch it. The conduit is too powerful. It could kill you if you're not careful, and I needed you safe until I figured out how to stop them." Lila's mind raced. She had always known there was something strange about this planet, but she never imagined it was this bad. The storm, the strange creatures, the ancient machine, everything was tied together, and Mason had been protecting the ranch for a reason. Suddenly, there was a loud crash from outside, followed by a strange, low growl that seemed to shake the walls. Lila's heart skipped a beat. "They're here," Mason said, his voice steady despite the fear in his eyes. "We don't have much time." Lila moved quickly toward the machine, her mind made up. The only way out of this was to destroy the source of the storm and stop the creatures from rising. But could she trust the machine? And could she trust Mason? As the growls from the earth grew louder, Lila felt the weight of the moment settle over her. She had no choice. The fate of this planet rested on her shoulders, and time was running out.